Have you noticed that there is a certain level of intelligence that is lacking in our species in these current times? And that intelligence has been over-related to the brain in academia and thought. And today I'm going to introduce you to some facts on where a deeper, more livable intelligence that is available to each and every one of us equally actually exists deeper within the body and far removed from just the functions of the brain. I'll also be explaining how I discovered this, or in a way, how this discovered me. Over 40 odd years ago, I was a yogi monk. I spent about 7 years in that holiday environment, the ease of life of being taken care of, having nothing to worry about but yourself. And it was a really enjoyable time. But during that time, it was also extremely illuminating, not from being a monk, but from something completely outside of the process of being a monk that began to happen in my own body after approximately 3 or 4 years into that period. And in that period, it was when my body first began to speak to me. And as you've noticed then, I've said my body began to speak to me. And that's how it appeared to me, because I'd already created a type of mentalized, spiritualized separation from my body, as though I was something different to my body. And my body, seemingly speaking to me, was in fact myself communicating with this fabricated self in which I'd got myself completely lost. How did this occur? In what way did this occur? This was not a gentle, mystical experience of my body whispering to me or providing me with insights and so forth. This was a violent eruption, a physically violent eruption, where my body would go into, or the body of me, as I know it to be now, would go into all sorts of contortions, primarily a contortion that was a revulsion in my body that would occur as I dropped off to sleep or during a period of sleep. And what would happen is that it would be as though I'd wake up in the middle of these contortions where my head, or the top of my head, would be on the bed, and the points of my toes would be on the bed, and the rest of my body would be in a sort of extremely arched condition. And it would move from this arched condition to slam back down onto the bed in the opposite formation. And it was quite interesting that it mimicked similarly to the various yoga postures. However, this was something that the body of me was doing completely of its own volition. And this wasn't the only thing that was occurring, but there was a reset of my chemistry going on at the same time. Of course, I didn't understand this at the time. It was just something that was happening of its own volition. But I was perfectly okay with letting this happen. There wasn't any fear or apprehension. And there wasn't any mental confusion. There was just an acceptance of something's happening. And I just felt the need and the rightness of letting this happen. And as these these chemical changes were happening, when chemistry does go through changes in our bodies, especially extreme changes, or gets out of balance in our bodies, then this produces hallucinations. And so during these periods of nightly periods of my body going through quite violent, very, very physical extremes of contortions and so on, the hallucinations that would overcome me would cause me to not even be so aware of what was going on physically. So I didn't actually suffer anything from this. It was just something that was happening whilst I was in this chemically induced hallucination of various things, much like people experience when they take drugs and so on. But this hallucination was very clear to me after a while that this was actually the erupting and the purging of much of the information and much of the beliefs and much of the imagery that had come of those beliefs from being a monk. And as this was happening, the other very interesting thing was, this happened over a period of two years actually, and I remember the initial room that I was in, I shared the room with two other brothers or monks. And the curious thing was that when I would go through these periods, that their bodies, whilst they're in their sleep state, would also go through these eruptions, would actually be affected by the atmosphere that I was somehow creating through what was going on in my body. And these other two fellows who were sharing the room with me would have not the same experiences, but their own experiences of their bodies going into various contortions and various eruptions, and they'd wake up in similar disturbances and being very disturbed with what was happening inside of them, because it was actually simply being triggered by me or by what was happening inside of me. And during this period, I was moved to two other places to stay, and wherever I went, I would be sharing the room with a small group of monks. In the night time when I go into these contortions, curiously, their bodies would start to go into contortions, or they too would find themselves sharing in hallucinations, having some hallucination. And so the explanation for this is irrelevant. It was just some nonsense religious content that was added to this and explained away by the beliefs of that particular religion. But what was actually happening in hindsight was that my system was going through a natural correction, a correction that actually all physical organisms want to go through and need to go through when they're indoctrinated and affected by what we have been taught to believe and what we have been taught we are, and the effects of these falsifications of ourselves that occur through education, through religion, through belief systems, and through imposing these on ourselves. And so most of us spend our life living in these semi-hallucinations that we see ourselves according to what we've been taught to see, and we see the world according to how we've been taught to see that. And so this is in a sense a mental hallucination which we view the world through, causing us to not see things as they really are, not to know ourselves as we really are. So this is not just typical of what I was going through, but it's actually typical of our whole species right now. But however, the unique thing that happened for me was that my body took over and my body began to speak to me, but it spoke to me in a very rough and abrupt way during my sleeping hours. And speaking meaning not as in words, of course, but releasing information that had been pent up in my body over a long period of time due to the practices and belief systems and due to the effects of my own life. And as this eruption was happening, the hallucinations and the information was pouring out of my system. And pouring out of my system in a lot of different ways. Information that was coming out of my system was information that I didn't even know was in there, that I had never even known before. And as this outpouring was happening over the period of 2 years actually, these physical contortions continued to happen. This chemical change or chemical rebalance, as I in hindsight came to understand it, was coming about quite naturally. And as time went on, so these contortions and so forth started to calm down and become much more fluid, much more soft, if you like. Until eventually the contortions themselves came to a natural end. And what I found that was over that time, there was this change happening where I was finding it more and more difficult to relate to, identify with, and go along with the image that I had of myself as a yogi monk. And along with this, the images and the ideas and the beliefs that I'd taken on as that monk were becoming less and less and less relevant to me. Until by the end of this, or near the end of this, I found myself not relating to any of the content of the monk's life at all. And the outcome of this was that I left this period of my life behind without really realizing I had. I firstly left it behind internally, meaning that for the final couple of years as a monk, I had already left the life of the monk behind internally, even though I was continuing to live day by day as a monk. And the reason I was doing this is because I had no urge to do anything else. I was quite happy to do that. It was an extremely pleasant life. And living my life for those final years, I was not actually in any way associated with what was going on, not internally. I was simply going through the actions on the outside and going through something very different internally, going through this leveling period before I eventually just left this situation altogether and went back into the real world. But going back into the real world, I found myself completely relieved of any of these belief systems, of any of these ideas, and I had placed absolutely no importance on what I'd just gone through because I didn't really understand it anyway. But what I had just gone through was my system, my physical reality of me, forcing a reconnection, communicating with this disassociated state that I got myself into, which we call a mind, a soul, or a belief system, and the experiences that we conjure through those. And reassociation was being, in a sense, forced from the body's way of reintegrating everything that's going on in here. And this is not something that I did, it's something that happened of its own volition. But as time went on, once I'd moved on into my life back into the real world, I realized I had something very valuable to share. And that was my understanding that the mind and body are not two separate things, but that all thinking originates from sensation. All information is held as sensations and intentions in the body. And if that information that we're holding in our body has been imposed on us, then that information is going to cause tensions and pains and illnesses and mental confusions. Whereas if that information is the information that is actually native to our own body, then this does not cause pain, this does not cause ailments, this does not cause illness, this does not cause tensions, and this does not cause ourselves to be at odds with ourselves in any way. So what I learned from this is that the reason the individual is at odds with itself is because it's thinking about itself using the thoughts that it's been taught from other people. It's not thinking about itself, and it's not thinking its own thoughts, using its own thoughts about itself to think about itself. So the thoughts that come from outside of us are imposed on us. The thoughts that arise inside of us are the language of the body. But these thoughts originate as sensations, I discovered, originate as sensations in the body way before our cognitive thinking ever comes into it. So something that I really did want to talk about today for the benefit of everybody here and for the purpose of showing you how you can begin to learn to listen to your own body. And in learning to listen to your own body, you'll eventually come to understand that you're actually learning to listen to yourself. Whilst you're listening to the thoughts that you've been taught to think, you will find yourself at odds with yourself. And once those thoughts are not continuing, as those thoughts drop away, as you learn to listen to the sensations of your own body, you will learn to live in a very, very different way. The way you're mostly living today is from the outside in. That means everything you learn from the outside, you impose internally on yourself and try to live according to that. And that's what's putting you at odds with yourself as you naturally are. Whereas the inside-out approach of our natural functioning is what I'm going to begin introducing you to today. And that begins with learning to listen to yourself from the inside out, rather than listening to the world outside of you and imposing those ideas internally and trying to live according to those. What I'm going to do is flip that around. We need to flip this around. Did you know that there is a brain function that happens preceding any conscious thought that you have? And for example, if you're about to make a decision, you think about that, and you think you are making that decision at the point that it becomes mentally known to you. That's when you think you're making the decision, yes? You want to decide on what you're going to do, decide on what's happening, and you are mentally going through something. So you are mentally conscious of this decision-making process. This is what we would think, yeah? Whereas something else is actually going on. You are not actually making the decision at that point. This is the delusion that we have about ourselves as a conscious thinking being. We think we're in control. We think we make those decisions at the point that we become aware of them. But actually, neuroscience, which is quite interesting, has started to notice, or has noticed, that this decision-making process has already occurred in the brain some up to 10 or 11 seconds before it becomes a conscious thought to the individual. So this is something that happens automatically. So this is really flipping things around, where we think as a conscious thinking being that we are in control of our body and in control of our life. The truth is starting to show itself, the same truth that I discovered through the experience that I've just shared with you as a monk over 40 years ago. And this truth is that, no, the conscious thinking is the final expression of something that's taken place earlier in the body. The conscious thinking is simply the final expression when we as a thinking creature become aware of what it is we think we are doing, what it is we think we are choosing. But that this choice is actually made in the brain some seconds before. So it's a physical function. This choice is not a mental thought process. This choice begins and concludes as a simple function of the brain, not where there's any words or thinking involved, not where there's any conscious awareness involved, but where the brain is actually performing this action, performing this, creating these synapses that are in fact the conclusion, the decision and the conclusion that we come to some seconds before we think about that. So the first thing that I've introduced there regarding the brain's function, making the decisions that we think we some 10 seconds later make in our thinking process, is the first indication that as a thinking being, we're not in control. We don't have choices as we think we do, and we're not in control of our life, but the body is in control. The body of us is in control. And this is an automatic form of control. The body has an inherent intelligence, which I'm going to talk about a bit more today. The second thing to bring you to, just as something for you to get your intellectual academic thinking around, and that is that the system called the enteric nervous system, which is known or been coined as the gut brain, where there is some 100 million neurons in the gut, in the lining of the tissue of the gut, that greatly affect our intelligence as well, that are a huge part of our intelligence. And 100 million neurons means that this is a highly intelligent area of our body. All of this, of course, is theoretical because it is science. Yeah, so who knows, it could be garbage, but it's just give you some indication of this science. Now, the reason I'm interested in the science is because I already understand that this is very true. I, from my own lived experience, understand that this sense of what we feel through our gut, the information in our gut, may not be cognitive or thought-based information, but it is certainly felt information, and is where we feel most of the information regarding our relationship to the world and other people. For example, empathy is something that emanates from the gut brain, and also what we call the gut brain from the solar plexus area. And we feel that empathy in that whole chest area of ourselves, chest and stomach area of ourselves, and we don't feel that empathy in our brain. Now, for a person who hasn't yet learnt how to feel again, this may not be quite so obvious, but once you learn to really feel again, you start to notice there are different functions going on all throughout the body of you. And learning to feel again is the prerequisite to learning to listen to your body again, because feeling what's going on in each and every part of you as a living organism, feeling is how the primary sense of knowing of the information in your body exists. It exists as a feeling. And what you feel, you know. You don't necessarily put it into words, but you know it as a sense of gut feeling. You know it as a sense of being sad. You know it as a sense of being happy. You know it as a sense of being concerned. You know it as a sense of being in pain. You know it as a sense of being hungry. You know it as a sense of being cold. And this goes on all throughout your body. You know as a sense of being sexually stimulated. You know as a sense of being sexually disturbed, and so on. And all of these different sensations and all of these different feelings are the language of the body, way before any thought process comes into it. And the interesting thing about the language of the body is it happens in the body parts that are relevant to the actions that we perform with that body part. And so in the gut, in the stomach, we very much have a lot of information there about digestion and about taking in information and digesting that information, but also taking in food and digesting that food. And this is a very similar feeling, actually. The digestion and going through a process that is something too much for you will often interrupt the physical capability of your body to digest its food. So when you're overwhelmed and overstressed by something, you often find that you don't feel like eating, because that part of your body is always already in a state of stress and already overworked with the digestion of the living experience or the stresses of your life that you're currently digesting. And so this is something to really consider, that the language of the body is there all the time. And we need to flip this upside down, that so much emphasis has been put on the brain, probably because science has apparatuses and developed apparatuses that can measure what goes on in the brain, whereas the measurement of what goes on throughout the whole body and the whole cellular structure of this body, there's not really much available to measure this. Not much at all. And so therefore it's overlooked. Without their tools and without their toys, the scientist is at a loss. They cannot understand the human being at all. Whereas for the human being itself and the body itself, as I've been describing, this is a different level of understanding altogether. This is the understanding of the living creature itself, of itself, in action. And how do we understand ourselves in action? This sounds a bit silly, but actually it's not silly, because most people have no understanding of themselves in action at all. Meaning we don't understand why we're performing the action. We don't understand why we want the things we want. We don't understand why we do the things we do. We are just automatically doing them. So the understanding that they're relying on here is the person's thought process. But there's a deeper level of understanding that we can get in touch with, and that is, where are we coming from when we are performing a certain action? What is the driving motivation force behind what you eat, behind what you do, behind what you want, and so forth? It begins as a sensation in your body. And that feeling, that sensation in your body, means you become more introspective in the only way that we can. And that is not through thinking, that is through feeling. So feeling is the language of the body. Felt sensation is the primary language of the body. And that primary language of the body means it's the primary language of the organism and the human being that you are. In fact, the language of complex thinking, we weren't born with that, were we? We invented that, we created that, and we have to learn that and then teach that to children when they're born, or are early in their life, because they're not born with complex language, but they are born with a sensory awareness of the world, with a felt awareness of their environment. And this felt awareness is still there today in every single human being, regardless of whether they've just been born or whether they're about to drop dead from old age. Yeah. So we find whether they're 1 or 100, this sensory language is of equal importance. This sensory language is actually the point at which we all operate naturally. And this level of intelligence is far superior to the mental constructs that we call thinking. Far superior to that. The brain has a very minor function. Of course, in my experience, is when there's damage to the brain, one is unable to think cognitive thoughts, to create thoughts, to create words. what happens when there's, say, damage to the frontal lobe of the brain, which is responsible for cognitive thought, is the cognitive thought is not operable. We can't actually form those thoughts. All we have is deeper in our bodies. We simply have the information, the felt sense of knowing something, but not being able to express it. And this is the felt sense of knowing, and this is from my own experience, is that felt sense of knowing is still crystal clear to a person who knows how to feel that when their brain is temporarily out of function for whatever reason. But once the brain is temporarily out of function, especially the frontal lobes of the brain, we are unable to create the thoughts or come up with the thoughts and the words to express what it is we know on a deeper level. So our communication with one another is greatly inhibited. Unless we are still able to function and have still been functioning on this purely sensory level and learn to operate more on what we sense and what we see in the way we read another person's body, in the way we sense our own body and the information that is transpiring between us on this more subtle, non-cognitive, non-mental level. So learning to listen to your own body is very important. So far what I've introduced is what I have discovered for myself to be the origin of information, origin of all information that exists, that it actually exists within the sensations of the body itself. And the body itself is already processing that information at a precognitive level, meaning that information is not yet information that you are thinking. So the decisions you make on day-to-day life are not actually decisions. The big decisions you make in your life are not actually decisions that you make cognitively. That's not the point at which you make the decision. It feels much as though you're in some sort of control of your life when you're able to see only that level of yourself operating. But when you start to notice that there's a totally different level of yourself operating called the living experience of the body, then you find there's a lot more driving what you end up thinking and doing than you are cognitively aware of, and it humbles you. It humbles you tremendously. You start to realize that in fact we are not making the decisions as a thinking being, but the decisions and the control of our life is an inside our automatic flow. There's a lot going on in this body that determines our thoughts, words, and our actions. There's a lot going on in our conditioning even that is held within us as a tension in our body. And in that conditioning, we have these urges to have things in our life that we've been taught to have, that we've been taught to want, but we don't know that that's where it's coming from. So in either course, whether it's the natural state of the human condition or the conditioned state of the human condition, that state is harbored within the tensions as information in the body, which is held as tensions and distortions in the body, or tensions and sensations in the body, out of which are determined our thoughts, words, and actions. And all we seem to know about, in most cases, is our thoughts, words, and actions. Whereas there is a lot more to us to be known at a much earlier stage that shows us that our life is actually a flow. Our life is, in fact, a flow. This is not just some mystical theory, but the flow of life is understood. Don't try and understand that just outside of yourself. This gets too mystical and disconnected. Firstly, understand it as it operates within you as a living organism. Understand it as it operates within you and within the skin of you. And how are you going to come into the understanding of this? And what is the benefit of this? This is where you start to notice that there is a flow happening that begins as various sensations in your body. And if you're in touch with those sensations, if you are sensitized to yourself as a living organism, then you are sensitized to these many sensations as they come and go. And as they come and go, or come and act out as your thoughts, words, and actions. But knowing that there is an origin of these within the felt sensations of the body of you, and even sometimes the origin, or many times, just as often actually, that it doesn't always just start as a sensation in the body of you, but it may start as a stimulation of the environment outside of you that causes a sensation in the body of you that then activates and comes into expression as a response to that outside stimulation. And so there's this continual interaction of stimulation and response that is actually the natural function of any organism on the planet. And the thought process, the governing process of thinking, is not actually required for that. But we've become so involved in the superficial level of our existence only that we become so lost and disconnected from the rest of our functioning, which is a far more vastly integrated system and a much larger system than just the system of thinking about ourselves. The system of thinking is a very, very superficial, unintelligent system. This is a system we call academic. It's just guesswork. There's no knowing involved. The knowing, which is quite separate to the knowledge that we can accumulate academically, the knowing is a felt sense in our body. When I feel hot, that is a knowing. When I feel sad, that is a knowing. When I feel interested, that is a knowing. Yeah, and that interest, that heat, that so forth, that supplies the information for me to think further on the basis of that. But if I don't notice that I'm hot, I may still automatically put on a jumper. Yeah. When we're so disconnected, the body is still functioning, producing the thoughts, words, and actions that are necessary for its well-being. When we are not noticing sensations inside of us, it doesn't mean we are not still having our lives determined by those very sensations that are actually formulating into decisions before they become our thoughts and actions in life. So as this is happening, how can we be aware of this, and how can we start to reattune ourselves to the automatic information flow that is always coming out of the body of us in response to our life? How can we reattune to this? We have to begin by coming back into the feelings of the body. What you can start with is, you notice that during the day, during any daily event in your life, you will find yourself being disrupted and triggered into reacting. You'll find yourself feeling distressed about someone and reacting to them, either reacting to them through your thoughts about them or reacting to them through what you say to them or what you do to them. And that reaction begins as some sort of disturbance in the body of you. And at that point of disturbance, you've already decided what you're going to do. That's how these reactions have so much power. You have already got within that reaction your urge of what you want to do and your intention of what you want to do before you actually think and act on that urge and intention. This is what makes it so powerful. How you can, how you can nullify that urge is to actually continue to notice the reactions when they are there and feel those reactions within the body of you. I'm not saying an urge should be nullified, but what I am saying is many of these urges, these reactions that you have on a day-by-day level, if you act them out, you will actually cause more disruption and more distress in both your life and the other person's. Whereas when you can actually be with those reactions, contain them as the sensation that they are within your own body, just feeling those, this feeling of those enables those to settle down and eventually dissipate simply as a felt reaction inside of you. Now, I'm not saying you should do this with every reaction, because your reactions are there for a good reason. And you should react when something is disturbing for you and something has just triggered you. You should react in many cases. But there's many cases where reaction is not actually based in a level of intelligence about yourself, but it's based in what you yourself have to come to terms with about and within yourself. For example, I might say something to you that challenges your confidence about yourself, and you feel the need to attack or reject what I'm saying. This is not really noticing what I'm saying is putting you in touch with, even though what I'm saying is the outside stimulation. But what is it putting you in touch with when you feel some sort of urge to reject or react to or complain about or simply switch off to what I'm saying, there is something, it's like what we call, I've triggered something. I've triggered a sensation in you and a feeling in you where you yourself don't feel so comfortable or confident in your own sense of knowing on what I'm talking about. And that's being challenged, and that's okay. When that's challenged, that is something for you to feel, because that's putting you in touch with where you feel uncertain and insecure within yourself. And that is something to know. That is something to take on and process. How are you going to process that? You're going to process that by feeling that and letting that feeling, letting that feeling of insecurity, that feeling of questioning yourself, letting that be there. Letting that be there so that you can at least become aware that you are not so clear on something in yourself that you have decided, that in past you may have decided you were. That you may be concluded on things inside of yourself that in this interaction you're starting to question. And this questioning is not an unhealthy thing. This can be very, very healthy. We need to be a critique ourselves and our conclusions on a day-by-day basis. Otherwise, we get stuck in the past and find ourselves interpreting our life through those past conclusions. And this is not an intelligent function. An intelligent function is when we're able to critique ourselves, or be critiqued, if you like, by the stimulations of life that enables us to look at things again and again and again, and continually look at life afresh as life continues along the way. And this is the nature of our intelligence of the body, actually. Thinking tends to be conclusive, whereas feeling is not conclusive. Feeling tends to be an ever-evolving, and I don't mean evolving to a higher level, but an ever-changing, adapting flow to be in itself, in the feeling of ourselves, an accurate interpretation or accurate sensing and knowing of what's going on in our environment, and an accurate sensing and knowing of the immediacy of the environment around us today. And if we're concluded, then we don't have an accurate sensing, we have a mental interpretation and a reaction to that environment. So simply noticing the reaction that's coming, staying with the sense of that, we can begin a discovery process in ourselves with every reaction in every day of our life. And that reaction may evolve into us going, okay, I'm fine with the way I've reacted, but in many, many cases, that noticing I'm reacting and resolving that reaction, we find we drop the conclusion that is putting us in conflict with the world or the people outside of us, and we find we're able to come into connection with those people in those situations without any problems, without having any personalized conclusions in conflict with those people or with the world around us. And in this way, we're able to live more at ease with the world, not letting ourselves down, of course, but through our own discovery of our conclusions being not necessarily correct, but based in the biased and unresolved experiences of our own history. And this is a process of constantly critiquing and negating, not on a mental, intellectual level, but on a feeling level, where when we're disturbed by something, this information is erupting in the body that I'm disturbed by this. And what is that information? How do we know we're disturbed? Is because we feel it. And we're disturbed by the information that's come to us or by the environment we're in. But to understand our own disturbance with that and to be with that disturbance it's actually taking the benefit of being disturbed. There is a benefit in being disturbed, and that is it causes us to go deeper into that disturbance within ourselves and be with that until it resolves. And this actually brings about a resolution of many of the biases and unresolved conditions that we have from experiences of the past that are not necessarily aligned with life as it is today. And this itself is listening to the body. And again, listening to the body is when you have pain, when you have physical pain in any area of your body, rather than reacting to that pain, understand that this pain is the body's way of communicating, of bringing attention to that area to communicate there is something out of balance here. So this pain is not there to harm you. It's not there to hurt you. It's there to alert you to bring your attention fully into that area. And when I say attention, I don't just mean mental attention here. The pain itself draws the attention of the rest of the automatic functions of the body, actually, that are required to take care of that injury, that pain, that stress. And this is a automatic healing process that happens, because all healing processes are, in fact, automatic. There is no healing that takes place out of our inducing of that healing. We do not actually have any control over the healing process of any organism. That healing is something that we pretend to have control over by being a healer or a doctor or a psych or something, but all we're doing is something mechanical. Something mechanical. I might sew up a wound, but the healing of that wound is beyond our mental powers, beyond our mental comprehension. We don't know how to make that happen. That is something that happens beyond the mental understanding that we have of the organism that we are. The understanding that takes place in the healing process is non-cognitive. It's not even mentally known. It is physically known. It's physically known as a pain. It's physically known as a sensation. And we know that those sensations in a wound will graduate from being painful to being less painful to becoming, as it's going through the healing process, to becoming itchy and so forth, to eventually dissolve altogether. And therefore the activity in that area lessens and lessens and lessens as the healing becomes closer and closer to its own end, until eventually the physical activity in that area, the intelligence in that area, the action of that area healing itself gradually comes to its own natural end when the healing itself is over. So this is an incredibly intelligent process. But we are not talking about the superficial intelligence of academia or our thought process, which we're so proud of. We're talking about something vastly superior to any of that infantile nonsense that we humans call intelligence. We're talking about something that happens in such a superior way that it doesn't make mistakes. It happens in such a superior way because it is an immediate response to the need. It is a sensory response of the body within itself to the need of some area of the body. And that response is exactly aligned with the need. It's never too much and it's never too little. And that is intelligence. That is intelligence beyond the clumsiness of thinking. So listening to our body is meaning also feeling everything that's going on in our body and knowing that it is going on without going into the thought process of, well, why is it going on? Why am I sad? Why am I unhappy? Why am I stressed? That may be important in our eventual process of dealing with our life situation, our life circumstances, but not in such a rush. Don't be in such a rush to work out why. Firstly, stay with the fact that you feel anxiety, that you feel stress, that you feel pain, that you feel whatever it is you feel uncomfortable with feeling. And the reason these feelings of uncomfortable feelings are uncomfortable is because they get our attention. They get the full attention of every part of what we are as a body, including they get the attention of our thought process. So how do they get the attention of our thought process, however? They cannot get the attention of our thought process directly because the thought process is not alive. It's not a part of the living process of the body. So the thought process is a dead function, mechanical function that doesn't itself feel anything. The word sadness does not contain the feeling of sadness. The feeling of sadness is actually the intelligence that gives birth to the word sadness. And the word and the recognition and the description of the word sadness, that is not intelligence. That is just the body's way of reporting. Or in fact, that is the way thinking reports on what is going on in the body. So what's going on in the body is the intelligence already in play. And we greatly overlook this. So to end this useless struggle that we all find ourselves in of trying to control our life, of trying to determine the direction of our life, of trying to make things the way we want them to be, and to endlessly struggle in this. And why I say endlessly struggle, because most of those struggles do not eventuate in exactly what we want. And yet we're struggling because we're struggling against what is happening and struggling for what we want to happen. And this is actually only what we only do at a thinking level, where we think that this thought process and the point at which we see ourselves, that which we can comprehend ourselves, forming decisions and controlling our lives, is actually quite delusional. And we continue to fight against the flow of life because we do not understand that the flow of the life that we are is beginning on the inside and flowing out into the expressions of our thoughts, words, and actions, and what comes about in our life because of those expressions. And we completely overlook and are so disassociated from the ongoing life of the body that is already running our lives, running its life, running the life of the living organism that we are. So you just think of that for a moment, that this living organism is so perfectly structured, so perfectly formed, such a perfect part of nature that it doesn't even need a manual. Yeah, it doesn't need intellectual conceptualization of how it functions. It is functioning automatically of its own volition at every moment of our life, even to the point of forming the decisions that we think we're making when we finally, some 10 seconds later, verbalize or mentalize those decisions, and even longer when we're talking about a process that we feel happening in this deeper aspects of our body, beyond our brain function, before it enters any sort of brain function, that which is functioning as the gut brain, and we're only calling that because it's some sort of term that we've come up with due to the neurons in that area. Or actually, I'm going to take this further and saying that's a pretty superficial discovery on the basis of science anyway. There's far more to it than that, as I discovered as a monk. And since then, that every cell in the body is processing information and also in connection with every other cell in the body. There's these many highways of information that are interacting and integrating all the time to keep the functionings of every part of what we are going in the most operative way, in the most beneficial way for the life of this organism. And so the struggle we can drop is to stop trying to think about what it is we should be, how it is we should be, and get more in touch with how it is we already are, and start to flow from there. Start to go with the directions and the inspirations that come out of the body at the purely felt level. So how do you start to get in touch with this? We've already been talking on it a fair bit, but there's a lot more to this. And essentially is whatever you feel going on inside of you at any point, just be with that feeling. Don't rush to resolve that feeling. If you get a bit of pain, don't take drugs to drug it out. Drugging yourself out, stopping the sensation of pain, is simply a way to disassociate from the intelligence that is functioning in you as a body and only making you a less intelligent creature as a whole. So why decrease your intelligence by drugging yourself out? Why decrease your intelligence by ignoring yourself as a body? This is the real intelligence of you as an organism, not what you learn academic. What you learn from outside of yourself is not intelligence. That is 100% indoctrination. That's all it is. It's just indoctrination, telling you how you should be, how you could be, and what you've got to do to be that. And yet none of us can be that. Apart from purely mechanical knowledge, we will learn from outside, of course. How to bake a cake, how to grow a garden, and so on. This is useful mechanical knowledge. But the information that causes you to question what you are, and the information that you are taught to determine what you are and determine how you should be, this is indoctrination. And this is just somebody else's controlling mechanism. You don't want that. You don't need that. You already have your own intelligence functioning as an individual life form. This intelligence that is functioning within you is something that is happening of its own volition for its own good. Why mess with that? You don't need to mess with that. by ignoring that, by suppressing that, by drugging that out, by disassociating from that. What you need to do, what we all need to do, is return to that natural function. But we're uncomfortable with that at first, and that's okay. You're going to be uncomfortable with many of the sensations that are going on in you and many of the situations that are going on in your life. But if you first, rather than trying to fix those situations or change those situations, you first need to get in touch with the sensations within yourself that are already in response to those situations. So, as I mentioned before, there's a reaction inside of yourself when something outside of yourself is at odds with you. There you have your warning. There's anxiety within you to draw your attention to something is wrong out there. There's stress within you that draws your attention to the stress itself. And the stress itself is not the problem. That's another intelligent function of the body. So we shouldn't try and get rid of stress. Stress is not our enemy either. Stress is there to warn us, to alert us to either something going wrong in our life out there, which we may have been overlooking, or something going wrong in our life in here, which we may not have noticed yet. And so the stress is drawing our attention back to wherever the attention needs to be at a felt level inside of us to really begin to understand what the hell is going on in our life. And it begins with understanding where is the origin of what's going on in our life coming from. The origin of that is within ourselves, and we need to be in touch with that. And how to be in touch with that is to stop ignoring the body of you, stop disassociating from the body of you into mentalization or spiritualization of you. And when I use the word body, I'm not talking from a materialist point of view. I'm not interested in the materialist point of view, and I'm not interested in the spiritualist point of view, because these are simply points of view. Therefore, they are bias. And they are interpretations of what we can only know of ourselves as the lived experience. Each and every one of us know our own lived experience as we feel it within the organism of us. And that is only known to us as that is, and it's not known to anybody else. So anybody who talks about spiritual enlightenment or physical enlightenment, these people are talking from what they've learned from the outside. You can ignore those people. If you really want to understand yourself, you need to ignore all that nonsense, because that's coming from the outside, and that is more indoctrination and more perception. We don't need that. We already have the intelligence of the body, which is far superior to anything else, simply because that is the intelligence that will help us. That is the intelligence that we need to function in day-to-day life, that we need as we live our whole entire life. And so that intelligence is useful. So when you feel cold, that is intelligence, and that is useful. When you feel sad, that is intelligence, and that is useful. When you feel disturbed, that is intelligence, and that is useful. When you feel pleasure, that is intelligence, and that is useful. You go with the pleasure, you enjoy the pleasure, but you resist the pain to some extent until you really start to feel that pain, and go with that pain and let that pain be the activation of the healing process that it is there to activate. And when we're talking about deeper distresses inside of ourselves, in your meditation, in the meditation of the body, of course, as from what I've been talking, you may have got the hang of the fact that I'm not interested in what we do with our thinking so much. There's a whole lot more going on in the introspective nature of the body way before thinking even gets on board. And the more we come back to the felt sense of ourselves and live as that felt being, because before we enter into just being a thinking being, then we can retain that sense of being a feeling being, whilst at the same time using thinking to express what we feel, using thinking to express what we know, using thinking and words and actions to allow the flow of what we first sense and know as intelligence in our own body to come out of us as an expression of us, and also as a response to people and the world around us in relationship with that. And this requires the whole body functioning, not just the mentalization of ourselves, which actually is a disassociation and a numbing of ourselves, but it brings in the whole empathetic feeling and interconnection that we feel in our torso and gut area before we ever come into words, thoughts, and actions. And that, if that's not there, then we're simply starting to disassociate into a more unfeeling, unempathetic state where we are disconnected, and therefore we become a dangerous person to be around. So, learning to listen to your body is boiled down to don't avoid the feelings that are there. Don't suppress the feelings that are there. And I don't mean emotionalize them through what you think about them. Come deeper than your thinking of those feelings and learn to be with the feelings for as long as they are there. Be with those sensations for as long as they are there. And in time, it will become your natural state to live this way, where you're always in the sense of what's going on in your body, even though you're interacting and talking and doing things in life. Yeah. This does not have to take you away from the felt sense of yourself in the body. And at this point, this is where meditation becomes a completely natural bodily function. And this is the meditation of the body that I'm helping you understand through the natural meditation that I have discovered, or that actually showed itself to me all those years ago when I was fooling around with meditation techniques and disassociating from myself into some yogic concept of myself as a monk, which was nothing more than just another fabricated persona. And when that dropped away, when my body came into play, it was rough. It was rough because I was stuck, solidly stuck in ideas of myself that were untrue. And they were not ideas about me. They were ideas about a fabricated me that I was trying to be. So today, I speak to you from this sense of my body all the time. Where this information flows from is the urge to share this with you in such a way that you start to increase your sense of your wholeness of yourself, so you can begin to heal from the inside out, so you can begin to know yourself from the inside out and discover this flow for yourself, that you are not in control. That only is an appearance of your thinking and your actions, but you are not even in control of the decisions that have already been made at a deeper level within the sensory apparatuses of your body before thinking comes into play. So this flow helps you see that if you get in touch with that flow, which means to be with the feelings as they form and as they come into expression through you, this is an ongoing day-by-day knowing of your existence and exactly what condition you're in and exactly where you're coming from. And when you know where you're coming from, you are deeply rooted in the motivating, driving forces within the body of you. And you have there an ability to go with that flow, to be with that flow, but also an ability to simply feel those sensations rather than acting on those sensations, if acting on them is going to bring destructiveness into your life. But if you don't have the felt sense of them, it'll be too late. If you don't have the felt sense of your disturbances, you will find yourself simply exploding in thoughts and words and actions because you didn't notice the origin of those disturbances in your body. So being with the origin of disturbances or feelings or sensations or intelligences in your body, you find yourself able to live with intelligence rather than just living as an automatic reaction to the world around you. Now, I'm not saying here this gives you control. What I'm saying here is that the system that you are is still in control of every day of your life and every part of your life, but you start to see that this control, that this system that is in control is operating and coming into expression in the way it is for very, very good reason beyond the capabilities of your cognitive intelligence. That everything that is happening within you and from you is a part of the expression and the resolution of you on an ongoing basis, a resolution of anything that you've lost sight with, the healing of anything that you've disconnected from, and the processing of any distresses that the body needs freedom to process. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Now, if you download my undoapp.com, I have 14 chapters in there that I put together over some years ago to help guide you through the process of discovering all of this for and from yourself, and also the process of discovering how much influential external control there is upon you and how you are living according to the thoughts of others, so that you can then start to break free of that way of living where you're just enslaved to the indoctrinations of others, but replacing that by going deeper into being guided by the intelligences and the sensations of your very own body, of the body of you. And this is coming back into a sense of yourself that feels solid in what you are doing in your life and okay with your life as it is. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for joining me today. If this talk resonated with you or helped you in any way at all, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the talk with your friends so that they can get the benefit as well. Okay, bye for now.